NFL free agency is about 2 weeks away. It is time to preview every position, all the best free agents on the open market this NFL free agency period, going from the offensive side of the football through the quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, offensive linemen, and then to the defense. We're going to talk about the pass rushers, the big interior defensive linemen, the linebackers, the secondary playmakers, all the best players available in free agency that your team may take a look at and may even sign. So, my goal here is to give you my thoughts on all the best players, ranking every position from quarterback to safety from number 10 through number 1. Give you some of my buyer beware players that I don't know if teams should be willing to spend so much on. They're definitely the riskier players, but maybe they have some reward to them. And then we also have some underrated, undervalued free agents that I do think a lot of teams should be more interested in, and probably the casual fan does not know much about these players. I also tried to add a few more players outside of the top 10 for specific positions that are very much stacked in this NFL free agency. So before we get started, before I rank every position from 10 to 1 through free agency and also give you all my thoughts in depth on every position, make sure that you do spike the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more NFL free agency coverage, NFL predictions, more previews. Everything on the BLV through March. We'll be discussing the offseason, NFL free agency, NFL draft, how to make your team better. That's what I'm here to do, and that's what I'm here to discuss. So make sure to spike the like button, make sure to subscribe, and make sure to spike the notification bell. Okay, so NFL free agency, the way I see it this year, we have some good positions. We have some strong positions with a lot of depth. The quarterback position is one that we have to start with. I feel like quarterback off the top has some pretty good players that we'll get to inside that top 10. The wide receiver position is weaker than most years, I would say. Offensive line has some intriguing younger players, specifically at tackle. Defensively, the defensive line is always stacked in free agency. You can find some good players there that can help your team. And the linebacker position, specifically this year, I feel is deeper than ever in free agency. I have not seen a linebacker class in free agency over the last few years that is this good or this deep. Also, safety is always a position that you can grab players, veterans that can play. So let's begin by discussing the quarterback position and the top 10 quarterbacks in free agency this 2023 NFL free agency period. We have to begin with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is the best it gets when it comes to free agency. I'm not sure if he'll actually become a free agent or if the Baltimore Ravens will sign him or not. I don't know what's going on with that situation, but it doesn't appear to be a good one for the Baltimore Ravens. It feels like they're not willing to commit, and Lamar Jackson doesn't really feel like he has to commit either, and he may want to go somewhere else, or he's at least open to that possibility. So Lamar Jackson, if he hits the market, if he is going to get traded or something, obviously he would be a game-changing quarterback, as to me he is an elite player at that position. He's a top 7 at the very least quarterback in this league. Geno Smith, I think, is flirting with the top 12 quarterbacks in the league after last year's performance, setting multiple Seahawk records, being just an absolute stud for the Seattle Seahawks. In the pocket as a passer, one of the most accurate passers in the game. Daniel Jones is a very good athlete that had his best season ever. He is number 3. I still am uncertain about how good he can be in the NFL, but I do feel like he was genuinely underrated last year for what he brought to the table for the Giants. I do feel he's a good runner. I do feel he's a pretty accurate passer. He needs more around him in New York. I'm sure he'll get back with the Giants. But the question to me for Daniel Jones is how much money? He's still relatively young. Derek Carr is at number 4. The reason he's not above Daniel Jones is because Jones is younger. I think more athletic, more potential ahead of him. Derek Carr is more established. Derek Carr is more of a veteran at this point. A guy that, I don't think that many teams are really going to be investing in long-term. Derek Carr, to me, is more of a guy that I could see going to a team that's more ready to win now, and maybe he's the cherry on top to an already good roster. Think the Jets, for example, or maybe even a team like the Carolina Panthers. Jimmy Garoppolo at number 5. Jimmy Garoppolo has had a lot of success in the NFL. Jimmy Garoppolo has a quick release. He's an accurate passer. He's good in the pocket. He's tough, and teams love him. Players love him. I do feel he's going to start this year. I just wonder where it's going to be. Is that going to be in a system similar to Shanahan's? Is it going to be a reuniting with Josh McDaniels in the Raiders? I'm not making predictions right now, but I will say that Jimmy Garoppolo is one of the more, I would say, riskier quarterbacks because you have to find the right fit. If you find the right fit, he can be very productive and win a lot of games, but if you're expecting him to be more than he has been in his career, which is pretty much just a distributor of a good system, then you're going to be probably not reaping the rewards of Jimmy Garoppolo. And then after the top 5, we have guys that I feel like are more so backups or like bridge options. So the top 5 to me are guys that I think can start this year right now. 6 through 10 are like bridge options, high-end backups, those type of guys. Jacoby Brissett, I do feel like, is the closest option on this list to being a guy that can start a whole year if you need him to. I thought he was actually very good for the Browns last year and surprised me a lot with just his overall accuracy, composure in the pocket, his ability to pass the ball. And I think you can win with him if you have a good defense and a strong running game. Gardner Minshew is similar. I've always been a fan of Gardner Minshew's game. I think he's got deceptive mobility. He's a gamer to him. And he's also a guy that I think players just gravitate towards. I think he's a very good backup, but if you were to have him as a bridge option, I think he would come cheap. And he's also a good leader too. We've never really seen him start on a team that was actually good, and when he did start for the Eagles, his numbers were pretty productive. So there is that. Also, we have Tyler Huntley, who's another guy that I would put in that category where he probably would be a good backup for a team that has a mobile quarterback. So that's why he's good in Baltimore. It would make sense if Justin Fields stays in Chicago for Tyler Huntley to be the backup in Chicago. Guys like that, I wouldn't want him as a starter unless, you were doing like a Marcus Mariota type deal with Atlanta last year where you're going to run a lot and then he's going to run a lot as well. And you're kind of looking for a bridge guy, but he's probably a good backup for a lot of teams. And he's still pretty young too. Andy Dalton is more that veteran quarterback presence at number 9, where Andy Dalton was actually really good last year. I felt like Andy Dalton played better last year than he did like in the last 3 years combined. Thought Andy Dalton kept the Saints in it for much of the year. I thought, he's a pocket passer. He doesn't have a super strong arm, but he's been there. He's been in a lot of systems. He's smart. He distributes the ball. He gets rid of it quick. He knows how to protect himself. He knows how to operate a system. So he's, to me, Andy Dalton, like a quarterback that you would want if you're a good team with like a really good quarterback and you need a guy to come in for like 2 to 3 games if that guy gets hurt, and then he can still win games for you. Like if you're, let's say, the LA Chargers and you have Justin Herbert and you need like a veteran presence to be the backup, Andy Dalton would be like that type of guy. And then number 10 might shock some people, but it is, for me, Jarrett Stidham. I just was impressed with what I saw from him in the 2 games that he started for the Raiders. I thought he showed a lot of composure. I thought he showed a gamer attitude to him where he made a lot of big time throws. I thought he was really accurate, has a pretty good arm, as I've known from New England when they drafted him. And he's got some mobility to him. He can run, scramble for first downs, things of that nature. But he's like a good backup and a good young backup where like you could sign him to a 3-4 year contract as a backup maybe and have him there for stability. He's also like a pretty smart guy who can help your other quarterback along, especially if he's a younger guy. So Jarrett Stidham's at number 10. I wouldn't be shocked if he went back to the Raiders and became their like bridge quarterback option. Now, when it comes to the other quarterbacks or the quarterbacks that are undervalued / overvalued or guys that maybe it's buyer beware, these quarterbacks are as follows. Undervalued. I think Gardner Minshew is just always undervalued. I've always seen him as like a back-end starter, and I don't think he's ever really been viewed as that since he left Jacksonville, but I just never felt like he got a fair shake in Jacksonville because they were the worst roster in the NFL. And I do think when you look at his numbers, they were productive in terms of passer rating, touchdown interception ratio, things of that nature. Jacoby Brissett, I think, is always undervalued. Again, another guy that I think a lot like Gardner Minshew has just been pretty productive when he's been a starter. Not saying they're starters, not saying anything like that, but if you need a bridge option, I think these guys are very solid. They're very well respected. They're very good human beings. I think that goes a long way. And then Sam Darnold actually shockingly makes the list for me. I thought Sam Darnold, even though he's not in my top 10, I put him in the undervalued because I think he played fairly well for Carolina at the end of the year. And if you put him in a place where he's like a backup, where he can come in and there's not a lot of pressure on him, he's athletic, he can move, he's got a decent arm, like, obviously, he was drafted high for a reason because he does have those traits, and I feel like he's growing mentally as a quarterback as well. He doesn't make as many mistakes as he used to, so I think Sam Darnold's like a potential dart throw as a backup. You know, maybe he could develop into like a Geno Smith later into his career because we know he has talent. Buyer beware. Jimmy Garoppolo, just because of the injuries, man. Jimmy Garoppolo is not a guy I would want to sign to 2 to 3 to 4 years. You want him on a 1 year just because, like, he's going to get hurt. Like, we know he's not going to play a full season. It's just not going to happen. Daniel Jones is buyer beware because we've never seen him play as well as he did last year. I like Daniel Jones, but I'm not willing to invest $40 to $45 million into Daniel Jones. If he wants 30, sure. But you got to get to a certain point. It's that thing with Dak Prescott, right? Dak Prescott kind of forced the hand of the Cowboys, and Dak Prescott had more of a lineage to his career where he was proven to be a good quarterback. Daniel Jones has proven to be a good quarterback in the perfect system, but has not proven to be a good quarterback in a less than stellar system, which scares me from paying him a lot. Teddy Bridgewater is just a guy I don't want anymore. Like, buyer beware for Teddy Bridgewater because a lot of people are going to look at him and say, oh, he's a good backup, right? Like Miami did last year. He's going to come in. He started a lot of games. He wins a lot of games. He covers a lot of spreads, all that stuff, all the mumbo jumbo about Teddy Bridgewater. But the guy gets hurt a lot, right? He's older now. His arm isn't there anymore. He can't move. Like, I don't know what he brings to your team other than just the namesake that he used to have in this league, but I don't think that's what he is anymore. So you got to beware about those things. Shout out to everybody in the chat right now. If you guys have any questions about the specific position that I'm talking about at the moment, please ask. So if you have a question about wide receiver, please ask it while I'm doing the wide receivers. If you have a question about a guy that I didn't put on my list, please ask that question. I will get to that question. Thank you guys so much for being here live. Jackson, Edward, Life and Sports Talk with Jake. What's up, Chad? What's going on, man? Chad actually says that the Lions could use Dalton. Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be bad, I guess. I think they might be going in the young quarterback direction, perhaps to be behind Jared Goff, but I'm not sure. How come so many teams need pass catchers? Because you can never have enough pass catchers. It's kind of like a pass rusher. Monty says Stidham come back to New England. I doubt it, just because they traded him, but I don't know. Who knows? What's up, Bodo? What's up, Caesar? What's up, Monty, Camden? Thank you guys for joining the chat. Okay, let's get to the running back position and my top 10 running backs. So my top 10 running backs, at number 1, I got Saquon Barkley as the number 1 option in free agency. Now, it was really close between Josh Jacobs and Saquon. It could go either way. Josh Jacobs led the NFL in rushing last year, obviously. I think where I like Saquon is he was coming off of, more injuries in the recent years, and now he actually made a season like through 100% healthy. So I think Saquon honestly could be even better next year than he is this year, just from a health standpoint, because he'll be stronger, faster, and quicker, and all those things. So, and I still think he's young, right? He's 26, 27 years old right now, so he's in his prime. And I could see Saquon very much having a career a lot like Frank Gore, where at the beginning of his career, he gets hurt a lot, but then he's just such a specimen and just a beast that he makes it a long way through his career and has longevity because his body is just uniquely created to play the position of running back. But he's also an excellent pass catcher, and that's where the separation lies for me between him and Josh Jacobs. I just think he can do more as a pass catcher. He can line up in the slot, out wide, run routes like a proper receiver, and I think that's the differential for me between Saquon and Jacobs. Jacobs was in a better run system last year under Josh McDaniels, but is an absolute beast and proved that he can play on all 3 downs. There were some questions about Josh Jacobs before last year about whether he could be a pass catcher, but he did those things well effectively out of the backfield. He is a strong runner, a tough runner, a grinder. He doesn't have the burst that Saquon does, but he's an absolute beast and one of the best running backs in the league. Tony Pollard is electric, but he does not have the certainty of being a 20-touch player like Saquon or Josh Jacobs, but he's a very, very good, like, all-around running back in terms of vision, speed, burst, all those things, and I would pay him as a starter, but you would need to have a power back behind him to be able to kind of spell him as that lead back. David Montgomery, I put him at number 4 because he's somebody that I like as a 3-down skill set. Like, he can do a little bit of everything. He can catch the ball. He's a grinder a bit. He doesn't have speed to break away from defenses, but he's good at breaking tackles and making something out of nothing with bad offenses. So I like that about David Montgomery. I don't think he's like an elite player, but he's a solid running back, which may mean that you could get him for cheaper than some of the other guys out there, and he's still pretty young. Dante Foreman is like one of the guys I really like in free agency. I just feel like the last 2 years, this guy has ran like an old school running back, hard, just absolutely breaking tackles, has better speed than you would think to him. I think he's somebody I would target if I was needing a running back and I wanted to add some power and some like toughness to my backfield. That would be my guy. Damian Harris is a really good running back, but he has not really stayed healthy as of late and also lacks a pass catching skill set, but I do feel he's underrated in that department. New England just didn't utilize him enough because Stevenson and White were much better in that category, but I think Harris can do more, similar to a Josh Jacobs like previous to last year. But Harris is like a really effective runner. He rarely ever gets stopped for no gain or rarely ever loses yards. He's just very good at finding space and getting yards and breaking tackles too. Miles Sanders, I do think is the guy that's overrated in this bunch. Like, he had a really good season, but it was with the best offensive line in football, an excellent offense, really good receivers too. So that took pressure off of him. I think he's a solid player, but I don't think he is what he was last year from a statistical perspective. So I wouldn't. Same thing with Jamal Williams. Like, Jamal Williams, there's a reason he was more so viewed as a backup in Green Bay and Detroit. I think he's a good player with a great attitude, and he's great for the locker room, but I wouldn't be looking at his touchdown numbers and all of a sudden paying him a whole bunch of money. I think he's a good number 2 running back with some power to his game. He can catch the ball a little bit, but I'm not going out there to pay him to be my starter. Then you've got Raheem Mostert, who I just love in terms of his speed. He's still got tons of speed. He still might be the fastest running back in the league. So that alone just gives you something. Now, he's a little bit more fragile, but he's also a good pass catcher. He's a good pass blocker. So he does a lot of things well. It's just you've got to be able to have his workload be pretty, split between another guy. And then Jeff Wilson is a different running back from Raheem Mostert, but you want him ideally in a tandem or a trio. And I thought what he did in Miami a little bit better than expected was catch the ball. He's also powerful, good vision, good for the zone scheme that McDaniel and Shanahan run. So if you're looking for a zone running back type guy, Mostert, Wilson at the back end there are pretty solid players. So those are the running backs. I think there's a lot of good ones. Monty brought up Leonard Fournette, who did not make my top 10, just because he was such an ineffective rusher last year. Now, I don't know how much that had to do with his health, because we've seen Leonard Fournette be a really good player in this league, just a couple years ago. He was huge for Tampa Bay. And what I do love about Leonard Fournette, first of all, I think he's got a great personality and presence to him. I think he's always stepped up in the playoffs. He's a big game player. He's a reliable player, doesn't miss a lot of games. So I like a lot of things about Leonard Fournette. The thing I don't like about Leonard Fournette right now is just he's never had great vision, and I don't know if he's as explosive as he used to be, but he does do everything pretty well. Like, he can catch the ball. He was like, a 60 reception, 70 reception player for Tom Brady. Now, a lot of that is because of Tom Brady, but Leonard Fournette is still really good in that department, and he's a power back. So it's rare to have a guy that has a skill set to catch the ball, but also be a power back. So I think Leonard Fournette, the question to me too, he's coming off a deal where he got a lot of money. Like, is he willing to take less, maybe be like an RB2 for a power team? Is he willing to go to Tennessee and be like the backup to Derrick Henry, or go to New England and be like the backup to Ramondre Stevenson. But that type of system fits him pretty well. So I would say that. Now, in terms of the undervalued and the overvalued buyer beware, I just brought up Leonard Fournette. I do have him as buyer beware because I think if you want him to be a starter and you're like, this is my thing with Leonard Fournette as a buyer beware. He was making a lot of money for the Bucks. They paid him pretty significantly. Is he going to want a lot of money? If he's wanting a lot of money, he's not worth it anymore. So I wouldn't be willing to pay him that. That's why he's buyer beware. You got to be aware of how much he demands. Miles Sanders, again, just because I think he's a bit overrated. I think he's a solid running back. I don't think he's anything special, but his numbers would suggest he's better than he is. So that's buyer beware. Jerick McKinnon, I feel like, was just like a great fit in Kansas City, but I wouldn't be willing to pay him a lot to be my third down running back anywhere else other than Kansas City, because he was just so good in Kansas City. But elsewhere, he wasn't great. So I wouldn't be willing to go. He's also getting older. Undervalued, Damian Harris. I do feel like if you need a running back that has some power, if you're looking to add that to your team, some toughness at running back, a guy that can carry the ball 15 times a game, Damian Harris is going to go for cheap, and I think he's a pretty big upgrade for a few teams. Like, if you're looking to get some more power to your running game, like the Buffalo Bills, steal Damian Harris away, man. I would say the same thing about Dante Foreman. I like those guys as 10 to 15 to 20 carries they can give you in a game. They're not great pass catchers, but they're good lead backs. Alexander Mattison has just always been a guy that feels like he steps in with the Vikings. Dalvin Cook's been an elite player. Alexander Mattison steps in, and it's not that big of a drop-off. So what if he were to get a bigger role elsewhere? I do feel like he'd be more productive. So that's somebody that might be slept on a little bit entering free agency. Monty asked if Fournette could go to New England. I think it's possible, because I think if Damian Harris walks, then they would look for somebody that I think the upgrade with Fournette over Harris, I don't think he's as good of a runner, but what he does do is he gives you a skill set that is similar to Stevenson, right? They're both big backs that have some explosion and have some power and also have that ability to catch the ball at their size. So you have guys that can play on all three downs, Stevenson and Fournette, that you can kind of interchange. And then maybe that makes them more... that helps Fournette because he's not playing every down like he was in Tampa Bay. On top of that, I don't know if they're sold on Strong or Kevin Harris, so I could see that happening, but only if Damian Harris leaves. If they want him back, then I don't see Fournette coming. I just don't see that. Because I think that would be too much money invested in that position. Now, moving on to the wide receiver position, which is always one of the more interesting in free agency. Last year, we had a lot of big-time contracts going to guys we didn't think maybe would get big money, like Christian Kirk, for example. But actually, it ended up paying off fairly well for Jacksonville. But the top 10 wide receivers here, I've got Odell Beckham Jr. at number 1. The reason I know that he didn't play last year, but he's had a full year to recover. From what I've seen, through his Instagram, I feel like he looks great. His speed looks there. His explosion looks there. He's only 30. So it's not like he's 34 or 35 years old. So I feel like Odell can bounce back and still be a premier number 2 receiver. I'm not saying he's going to be OBJ from 2014, but I think he can be a very good number 2 receiver. And I think a lot of teams could use that. I mean, look what he did in the playoffs with the Rams. Look what he was doing in the Super Bowl before he got hurt. He was really good for the Rams in that playoff run, catching like 10 passes a game against the Niners and the Bucks. So he was really good in that run for them. And I think he's gotten a lot more mature. And I think at this point in his career, he's pretty much an icon. So I think he can, help a lot of the younger players, especially if you have a young receiver room. He can help them grow, I feel like. So there's a lot of good things for Odell. But the only thing is, will teams be willing to pay him? Which is also a good thing because he may come cheaper than somebody like Jacoby Myers, who's been relevant the last couple of years. But the thing with Jacoby Myers is a lot of people have him ranked as the best. I don't. I'm a Patriots fan. I like Jacoby Myers. I don't love Jacoby Myers. I think he's a good possession receiver, but he's he doesn't give you anything after the catch. He's not very fast. He's just not explosive. And I like my receivers to be explosive. So he's as consistent. He's a good guy. He's a hard worker. I think he was undrafted. He's come from nothing, and he's been productive with Mac, Cam, and Brady. So he's going to be solid, but I just wouldn't be willing to invest a lot of money into him because I just don't think he's a number one receiver, and I think he might get overpaid. So that's kind of my deal with Jakobi Meyers, but he's a solid player. DJ Chark, I like what he can do on the outside. He's still got speed. He's tall. He has definitely the skill set to be a number one, but it feels like he's just been too inconsistent from an injury standpoint. But I would be willing to pay him a 1-year deal, kind of like the Lions did last year, on like a $9-10 million. And if I needed a guy that could run and go vertical, I would look for DJ Chark. Juju, my concerns with Juju are not really the skill set or the player. I think Juju last year proved me wrong in some ways. I thought he kind of stuck in his lane. He played hard. He played with more physicality than he did previously. He brought an edge to the Chiefs receiving core. He was breaking tackles. He was tough to handle when the ball was in the air. He's not great in terms of like separation, but he's not a bad route runner. He's a fairly smart football player, contrary to his TikToks. But Juju is somebody that I would worry about paying a long-term deal just because I feel like he has interests outside of football. He's not obsessed with football. And those are the type of players where I would feel like I wouldn't want to commit to them long term. I feel like Juju's a guy where I would pay 1 year and I would want him on my team like the Chiefs last year, especially if he came in with a chip on his shoulder like he did last year. But the guy just won a Super Bowl. I don't know how he's going to go into future years with the same intensity that he did last year. So very good last year, productive last year, but concerning moving forward for those reasons. Then after that, Paris Campbell is a name that Monty is shocked to see at number 5. Paris Campbell was actually underrated last year for his production. I think he had about 600 yards, 50 catches on a pretty bad offense. And Paris Campbell is the one guy in this entire group that I would say he's fast. He's still young. The only reason he is not more well known is because he's been injured. That is the guy I would look at and say, if I'm taking a shot on one of these guys, like he could still be the guy out of everyone in this group where he has untapped potential that you could maybe try to capitalize on. I feel like Paris Campbell is a pretty good player and got some speed and athleticism to him. So I like him. I've always liked him. And then after that, we've got Alan Lazard, Robert Woods, 2 possession type veteran receivers play in the slot fairly well. Robert Woods doesn't have the speed he used to. Alan Lazard doesn't have speed. But they're both, Lazard's more physical to me. He makes more plays with the ball in the air than a guy like Robert Woods. But Robert Woods is a good route runner, good possession receiver, probably more of a number 3 at this point. Darius Slayton has been inconsistent his whole career, but when he's good, he's good. Marvin Jones is a jump ball receiver, pretty much a number 3 at this point, but he's been productive for many, many years. He's about 33 now, so he's older. You probably sign him to a 1-2 year contract on a good team. He could be a guy that, you just throw in there for a different type of body, different type of receiver. Mecole Hardman's my number 10. He's not a very good receiver, but he's very fast. And just that alone, I think, puts him inside my top 10. He hasn't been a productive receiver on the best offense in the NFL. That scares me, but he's a good, you just give him a handoff, give him a touch pass, throw him a screen. He could punt return. He can do a lot of different things. So his speed alone makes him relevant to the free agency period. So the undervalued and the buyer beware. So I do have my buyer beware. I do have my top receiver in buyer beware. So that is the pros and cons with OBJ. Obviously, coach doesn't like him, never has. Says he's injury prone and old. I still think if you're going to gamble on one guy here with the most upside that exists is definitely OBJ. But he is in the buyer beware because he's had injuries, and we don't know what he's going to be like coming off of a year rest from the NFL. But again, a year rest could be good for him because he's had time to recover. So you got to kind of be able to work him out and see how he looks. That's a guy where I would want to work him out before I sign him. Jacoby Myers is a buyer beware for me. Not that he's like going to come in and suck. That's not the concern. He'll be good no matter where he plays. But my buyer beware is the contract. I could see him being overpaid for the value that he actually brings to a team. I think he's a good number 2. He's not a number 1 and a solid slot receiver, but just don't expect like an alpha target. Juju Smith-Schuster, same thing for all the reasons I talked about, just worried about his motivation moving forward after winning a Super Bowl. Now, he does want to cash in this contract because he was only on a 1 year last year. So there's a lot of reasons I'm very, very much aware of Juju moving forward. Undervalued Paris Campbell, again, like the guy that I think still young, had a couple years of unlucky injuries and kept him off the field, but was pretty good last year. Some upside there. Richie James, I just felt like was a really solid player for the Giants. If you're looking for a number 3, number 4 receiver, I think he brings some value to the slot position. Mac Hollins is a really good teammate, hard worker, great special teamer. And he did play as the number 2 target in the Raiders last year and made a lot of plays. He's got good speed. He can make plays from the balls in the air. Good jump ball guy. So I think Mac Hollins is super underrated. I'd be willing to pay him as a number 3/number 4. He's also a good blocker. So there's that. Okay, so that's the wide receiver position. Now, the rest of the pass catchers. Let's get to the tight end position. If you guys have any more questions, let me know. Big L says, which team would be a good fit for OBJ? I'm hoping the Patriots make the move. I saw a picture with Robert Kraft and OBJ on the Instagram. OBJ posted it in February. Outside of New England, I do think that Kansas City could be an option. Definitely. I feel like the Packers, if they keep Aaron Rodgers, that could be a move that they utilize to appease him. Other places, maybe Lamar Jackson's Ravens, if Lamar stays there. That's a couple options. And then obviously Dallas, because they were heavily interested last year. And I do feel like Dallas really needs a number 2 receiver. I think he would be an upgrade over Michael Gallup. So I'd say, and it's just a natural fit, the big personality and the big superstar with the star. It makes sense. And it would be very cool for football, honestly. Then we've got the top 10 tight ends. The tight end position isn't great in free agency. I do like the top 5 mostly, but I do feel like there's some guys that maybe a little bit overrated, might get a little bit overpaid. I think Dalton Schultz could be one of those guys. I like Dalton Schultz. I don't think he's anything special. I know my boy Dilly Vanilli, Cowboys fans seem to love him. I'm okay. I think he's fine. I think he's a good player, good possession, tight end, smart, can do a little bit of everything. He's not super explosive though. Evan Ingram is more of a receiver than a tight end. He was franchised, so you really take him out of this conversation. But I feel like I would have said, like, Evan Ingram, he's a good fit in Jacksonville, needs to stay in Jacksonville. If I was any other team, I wouldn't have been super invested in Evan Ingram. The reason I'm not a huge Evan Ingram fan is because I think from a personnel standpoint, he's almost like he's a good player. He's a good mismatch type of player. But he's also, like, he's not a mismatch for your offense in some ways. Because when Evan Ingram is a tight end, he's still a receiver. So, like, he's not doing anything to help you in the running game. So he's only a receiving option. Which is why I'm not a huge Evan Ingram fan, because I like more traditional tight ends. Because I'm a Patriots fan, obviously. So Evan Ingram is somebody that is a good guy, like, to have as a number 3 receiving option. But once you force him into the number 1 or number 2 role on your team, you're starting to get a bit in trouble there. So Jacksonville having Calvin Ridley and having Christian Kirk and then Evan Ingram, that's nice to have. Other teams, I'm not so sure. So moving on from that, Mike Gesicki is somebody that I really like. in free agency this year, just because I think he's super undervalued. He's coming off his worst season of his career because they didn't use him. It's not because he got worse. It's not because he sucks. It's because they didn't use him. So I feel like if you're looking for a bigger version of Evan Ingram, a guy that's not really a blocker, but he's a great athlete, deceptive route runner, great in the red zone, that's a guy I would get. So Mike Gesicki is somebody I think could be super undervalued if a team needs a receiving tight end. Hayden Hurst, I thought, had a really good year last year. I thought he played really well with Cincinnati. Joe Burrow and him seem to have some chemistry. He's not the number 1, number 2, or even number 3 option. But as like the number 4 in Cincinnati, I thought he played really well. He can also block a little bit. He's got good speed. He's got good after the catch ability. I think he'll stay in Cincinnati because I thought he was really good there. But if another team snatched him away, I wouldn't be surprised because I thought he played really well last year. His best season of his career, in my opinion. Austin Hooper, I thought had a bounce back year in some ways with Tennessee. I just felt like every time I watched the Titans play, he came through with a few big catches in every game. He's not a guy that's going to catch 70 to 80 passes, but he's going to catch like 40 to 50. But all of those catches are going to be like on third down, in the red zone, on a crucial play. He's going to like run a really savvy route, and he's going to catch the ball for like an 8-yard gain, and it moves the chains. Like, that's the guy. I like Austin Hooper a lot from that standpoint. He's also a decent all-around tight end. Obviously played in Tennessee last year, had to do a lot of blocking. He's played in Atlanta under Shanahan before. He had to do a lot of blocking there. So there's a lot of like flexibility to his game and versatility. So those top 5 I like. Fabian Moreau, I think Foster Moreau, Fabian's the corner, is a guy that I feel like is well-rounded, but might be overvalued because people see potential in him that may not exist. That's kind of what I feel like with Moreau. Like, he's had opportunities to shine when Waller's been injured, and he never really has. And that's what's concerning to me about him, because I think he's overhyped a little bit. He's got a good skill set, but he's never actually proven to be a good player. Robert Tonyan has a nice skill set, had a really great year a couple of years ago, but I don't know. Injuries have beat him up. He's not a great blocker. He's a good red zone option. I think he's fine in that system, and I think Aaron Rodgers made him look better than he is, quite honestly. Jordan Akins is a guy that I think is underrated from Houston. I thought he played really well the last couple of years, just for what they asked him to do. I think he's a solid receiving option. He's a big guy. It's tough to cover. I think if you want a number 2 tight end, he's like a flirting with number 1, number 2 type of tight end. Irv Smith has had some injuries, but still has some potential that's been untapped because we haven't seen him that much. And Josh Oliver's like a solid number 2 tight end option. So those are your top 10 tight ends. After that, we've got undervalued and buyer beware. Undervalued, I think Mike Gesicki's undervalued because I feel like he's coming off the most unproductive, lacking productive year because he just wasn't a good fit for McDaniel's offense. But I think elsewhere he'll be good. Hayden Hurst, like I said, just well-rounded tight end that's actually a really good athlete. And Austin Hooper, just consistent tight end, one that if you don't really need a tight end, it's not super important to your offense. He's a good guy to sign up because he can do a little bit of everything, and he's just a clutch playmaker. Buyer beware. Evan Ingram I put there for other teams, and obviously he got franchised this AM. Foster Moreau, because I think there's teams that will fall in love with his skills but not his production. Irv Smith is a guy that had a high-end draft profile, so teams may sign him to like a contract that they probably shouldn't because they liked him coming out of the draft. But I've never really loved him in the NFL. So those are my undervalued buyer beware players at tight end. Now moving to the offensive line, guys. If you have any more questions, let me know. Gronk, spike the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you are new. Big Al says, which team would be a fit for OBJ? I already answered that. Big Al says, Tonyan may walk if Rodgers leaves Green Bay. Yeah, I think so. I don't think he's coming back to Green Bay, maybe regardless of Aaron Rodgers being there or not. I just feel like if I'm him, I I may want to go somewhere else because I felt like the last couple of years he maybe wasn't really utilized that well. So next up, tackle position. We've got a very intriguing tackle position. So Orlando Brown from the Chiefs is a free agent. He's going to get a huge contract, probably undeservingly so. I mean, he's a good player. He had a great Super Bowl, which is going to get him paid. I don't think he's a great tackle. I actually think he's a better right tackle than he is a left tackle, but he insists on playing left tackle. He's got a little bit of an ego to him. So I don't know if I'd be willing to pay him personally. But if a team is desperate for an offensive line upgrade, which a lot of teams are, and they want to protect a young quarterback and they have a power running scheme, he's an ideal fit. And he's a good player. Don't get me wrong. Caleb McGarry is still young and is coming off his best season of his career in Atlanta. I do think Atlanta is going to try to sign him back. But I thought he improved greatly the last couple of years, and he's pretty much improved every season of his career. Last year was his best of his career, and he's hitting that point of his career where tackles and offensive linemen seemingly just play their best. So I think Caleb McGarry is a very sneaky guy on the market that could get a pretty big contract that not a lot of people are expecting. Mike McGlinchey, I think, is overrated. You know, I talked to Lenny a lot about the San Francisco 49ers offensive line. And Mike McGlinchey has always been the guy that Niners fans are not in love with. He's a really good athlete, and he had a very good draft profile coming out of Notre Dame. He was a first-round pick. He's a very good run blocker, but as a pass protector, which is what you want at tackle, he's underwhelming. Now, he could still get better because he's still young, so I think a team will be willing to risk on him because he's somebody that still has potential, and he's somebody that's still young enough where he can improve as a pass blocker. So I think zone-based teams will love Mike McGlinchey, but not power teams. Isaiah Wynn, another guy that has had some injury issues like Mike McGlinchey, has been inconsistent like Mike McGlinchey, but has a lot of talent, was drafted high in the draft, and just last year coming off a crap year. Like Isaiah Wynn last year was terrible for the New England Patriots. He had the most penalties in the NFL. He was a disaster in their new system, but I think what happened for Isaiah Wynn is he moved from the left tackle to the right tackle. That is thing number one. He obviously had injuries, thing number two. He had a terrible offensive coordinator, thing number three, and that offensive coordinator was also the offensive line coach. So I think there's a lot of ways that Isaiah Wynn could be a steal, because if he just stays healthy and he goes to the right system, he's somebody that's a good quality tackle. We've seen him play well in his career when he's played, but the only year he hasn't played well was last year. So Isaiah Wynn's really interesting because I could see him going elsewhere and being really good. He didn't really fit in New England from like a personality standpoint, though. I don't know. No, I could see that going either way. Jawan Taylor is somebody that has a lot of potential still, is a big body coming off his best year of his career. And Jacksonville, I think, put him in a good position last year to succeed as a pass blocker. He's never been great, but he still has potential. So those 3 to 5 guys are super intriguing because I could see all of them getting decent contracts because they're still young enough where a lot of teams would be willing to buy in. Jermaine Illuminor is where there becomes a gap there, where Jermaine Illuminor was a really good almost bridge tackle for the Raiders last year, and he exceeded expectations. But that's the thing with Jermaine Illuminor. I haven't understood why teams have not been willing to buy into this guy, because when I've seen him play, he played for Baltimore, he got traded to New England. He was the swing tackle in New England. The year that Cam Newton came to New England, he was a starter at right tackle for a lot of games, and I thought he played really well for the Patriots. And then all of a sudden, Josh McDaniels obviously felt the same thing because he became their starting right tackle in Las Vegas, and they picked him up for nothing. Like, I think this guy is perennially underrated. So I think he only allowed 4 sacks last year. I just think he's a super underrated, versatile veteran tackle that if a team needs an upgrade at right tackle and they're a decent team, I'd take a look at him because I think he's a valuable player. Kelvin Beachum is similar to Illuminor, where they're veterans, but they've been productive. Now, Beacham's older. I think he's like 33. But he's just been solid. Like every year of his career, he's been solid. You know, you can count on him. You know he's going to play. And those guys are valuable. So Riley Reef is similar to Kelvin Beachum. If your team just needs to go from terrible to okay at right tackle, that's your solution. Riley Reef. Just don't play him at left tackle because he's terrible at left tackle, but he's good at right tackle. Taylor Lewan is a huge, I don't know. He used to be amazing. He used to be a great tackle, especially with the Titans in terms of run blocking, just beat people up. He was old school. He had an aggressiveness to him, a toughness to him, an edge to him that I love to watch. And I think a team like maybe even New England could take a look at him. But, you know, like I think a team that maybe is willing to risk, and hopefully he goes to a situation where he's able to prove himself. But I feel like he's a guy that is boom or bust. He's rather going to get hurt again or he's going to be amazing. Like I don't think there's going to be any in between there. Andrew Wiley is somebody, he was the starter in the Super Bowl for the Chiefs. He's a solid start. He's a low end starting right tackle. That's what he is. Like, you know, you're going to get serviceable play, but nothing special. That's Andrew Wiley. He started in the Super Bowl for the Super Bowl champ. That's not bad, right? At right tackle. And they had a really good game. And he's had some really good games, but he was definitely the weak piece to that offensive line. Now, the buyer beware and the undervalued players at tackle. Jermaine Illuminor, I went on a soliloquy about him. I think he's way underrated. Calvin Beachum, just a solid pro tackle. Cameron Fleming had his best year of his career last year. He's played in New England. He played in Dallas. He's played in New York. He's had some really tough moments, but he had his best year of his career last year in Denver. Graded very well for Pro Football Focus. Somebody that you might be getting cheap. That's a good swing tackle at the very least and might even be able to play right tackle as a starter. Buyer beware Orlando Brown. I just feel like the guy has always proven to have a huge ego. I think he's a good but not great player, and I think he's going to be paid as a great player, and I'm always buyer beware with those type of guys. Mike McGlinchey, just because I think if you separate him from the system in San Francisco, he could be exposed as a pass blocker, and I think teams might be willing to pay him more than he's worth. Isaiah Wynn, mostly due to the injuries, and I do question his ability to stay healthy as well. He hasn't been able to play a full season in the NFL, but McGlinchey and Wynn are similar because they were both drafted in the first round. They both are still young. They both still have potential. Both could be overpaid, which is why I'm buyer beware with those players. So those are the tackles. Now moving to the interior offensive line. Big Al says Taylor Lewan needs a change of scenery. I don't see him returning to Tennessee next season. I could see him returning, but I don't think it's going to be for a lot of money. I think he does respect Mike Vrabel and the Titans, but I could definitely see him going elsewhere for a contending team. And one of those teams potentially taking a shot on him for sure. I could see that happening. Next, our top 10 guards. So at number 1, I got Isaac Samalu for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's a really good all-around guard. You know, nothing really special, I would say, but he's a borderline Pro Bowler. He's very good in the run game. He can move really well. He's just a good player. He is about 29 now, though, so you don't want to pay him a super long-term contract, but like a 3-year deal to come in and like just solidify your interior. If you're one piece away on the offensive line, that would be a move that I would make. Ben Powers, I really like out of Baltimore. I think he's a really good pass blocker. I think he was graded as the top 2 or 3 guard in the NFL as a pass blocker last year for Baltimore. And hey, I mean, he played for Baltimore, so how bad can he be as a run blocker? He probably isn't that bad because he played for Baltimore, and they ask you to do a lot at that position as a guard run blocking. So I think he's kind of undervalued to some degree because he's still fairly young. After that, we've got Nate Davis, who I love from Tennessee. I think he's got a huge potential, but he's got to be in the right fit. He reminds me a lot of Shaq Mason, honestly. Like, I think he's a really good run-blocking guard, very physical, and has got some good movement ability as well. Will Hernandez, a guy that I liked coming out of the draft many years ago, but just because he had an edge, a toughness, he was not very good with the Giants, couldn't really find consistency, but he's found that age where a lot of these linemen just mature and they get better and they just like have a familiarity with NFL systems, and it just feels like these guys play a lot better at this type of age, like 27-ish, where these guards play their best football, and Will Hernandez has hit that age. He's also really kind of a just downhill guard run blocking type of guy. I like him as maybe a cheaper option that could be better than expected. David Edwards, if you're in a zone scheme, he was good with the Rams 2 years ago on the Super Bowl champs and the year before that as well. He's been a good guard in this league when he's played, but last year he didn't play very much. He got injured, but if you're in a zone system, he's a good fit. Daniel Brunskill, I think this is like my offensive lineman crush. He's from the Niners. He played center, guard, and tackle. He's started at all positions. He's just a solid player, and he can back up every single position. That's why I love him. Connor McGovern for the Dallas Cowboys, good pass blocker, not a good run blocker, but he's still young. Justin Pugh used to be awesome, but he's just old now, and he gets hurt a lot. But if he can stay healthy, you might get a steal. Elijah Wilkinson had his best season with Atlanta last year in a run-heavy system. I wonder what he would be like if he's forced to pass block more. I think he used to play tackle, but he played pretty well at guard for Atlanta. So those are my top 10 guards. There's some good options there, and there's actually even more. So as we get to the undervalued and the buyer beware options, there's actually guys I didn't even include on the list there, like Nate Herbig, who played for the Jets, who I thought had a very solid year for the Jets. He's another young guy. He used to play for Philadelphia as a backup, and then the Jets picked him up to start for them, as Philadelphia always has just bodies at the offensive line position, kind of like Baltimore. It just feels like if you need a guy that can start a guard, okay, let's go to Philadelphia's depth chart. Let's go to Baltimore. Let's pick those guys up, and let's put them in the starting positions. Michael Schofield, no, not the prison break guy, the other guy. Played for the Chicago Bears last year, graded out very well. He's a solid veteran player that I think's like a good third guard. Like if you need somebody that's a fringe starter for cheap, but can also be a steady backup, that's your guy. Ibushi has played on a couple teams. He played for the Rams last year, played for the Lions, I believe, before that, and has just graded out very well. So I included him here on undervalued. And then buyer beware, Justin Pugh, Isaac Samalu, and Connor McGovern. Isaac, because I think he's a good, not great player, and I feel like he's the best at the position, but he's not phenomenal. All right, so I wouldn't overpay him. So I think somebody will, just because that's how offensive lineman markets are every year. Then we've got Justin Pugh, who if you want to pay him to be a starter, you're probably going to overpay him because he's going to get hurt. That's just how it's going to go. Connor McGovern, because I think he's very flawed. He's got potential, and he's a good pass blocker, but I feel like he's exposed at times as like a physical run blocker. So I could see a team overpaying him like I felt like Miami overpaid Connor Williams last year, and he was a similar player to Connor McGovern this year. So that's the guard position. Not a sexy position, but certainly one that can help a lot of teams. We've got the center position after that. Welcome to some of the new viewers in there. Don't forget to Gronk spike the like button. Let me know any questions you have. Centers. Jason Kelce is my number one center. Jason Kelce is one of the greatest of all time, but it feels like if he comes back, he's going to play for the Eagles. After that, we've got Connor McGovern for the New York Jets. McGovern, I know that I just talked about a Connor McGovern. There's two in the NFL. I understand. Connor McGovern's a very solid center. He's a top 7-ish center in the NFL. Definitely worth a 2 to 3 year contract. Ethan Pochich, graded as the third best center in the NFL. My only question about that is, before he got to Cleveland, he was just okay. He went to Cleveland, one of the best offensive line coaches in the league and systems in the league, and he all of a sudden is elite. I'm not willing to buy into that, but he's a good player. Jake Brendel is a similar situation where he's a veteran player who went to the Niners after playing in Miami, developed there, played very well, but he's in a very good system. So I'd only really be willing to sign them in my system or a similar system. Like maybe if you're the Rams, you sign Jake Brendel, but not many other teams. And Evan Brown after that's been a very steady backup for the Lions, and then basically he's been able to step up whenever needed at center or guard for that team, and he's been good in that role, but I do think he's a starter. After that, Bradley Bozeman, I felt like was out of place in Carolina, was playing in the wrong scheme. But if you get him in the right scheme, I think he can be a good player. Like, he was good in Baltimore, but he was just in the wrong scheme last year. And I questioned that from the very beginning with Carolina. So he didn't play as well. Garrett Bradbury, I think, is one of the most overrated offensive linemen in the NFL. He's probably going to be overpaid, but he has never played well in the NFL, in my opinion. Like, I just don't think he's very good. He was a first-round pick, so people are probably going to put more stock into that than probably they should. I don't think he's ever played well. Joe Feliciano for the Giants, coming from Buffalo, moved to center for the Giants, played pretty well. He's a solid pro, not special. Nick Gates is somebody that I like. He's very tough. He was one of the comeback player of the year candidates this year. He was coming back from a horrific injury, and he found a way to be tough and get out there and play guard and center. And I think he's a better center, though. And then we've got, finally, just backup types after that. So, center position, Corey Levine, I believe is how you pronounce his name, from the Tennessee Titans, was pretty solid for the Titans in a limited role. And that's what the type of guys I was looking for undervalued type of players on the center position. Because a lot of these guys, like James Ferentz, for example, is a New England backup, but he starts whenever a guard or a center gets injured. And those guys are really interesting to me because that means that you could probably be very versatile and very valuable for a number of positions. So those three guys right there, Froholt, Ferentz, those guys are interesting because they provide versatility, depth, and they're cheap. So that's why I like those guys. Buyer beware. Garrett Bradbury, like I said, just never been good. Ethan Pocic, just because he was really good in Cleveland, but not really anywhere else. And Billy Price, another guy like Bradbury, has never been good despite being a first-round pick, and people overvalue the draft status. So I realize we went super long on the offensive side of the football, but let's continue, man. Let's continue. Let's keep it going. Gronk, spike the like button if you haven't already. If you have any questions, let me know. Let's move to the defensive side of the football. I know you guys have a lot of defensive needs for your football team. So let's start with the big boys up front. That is the defensive line, the interior defensive line. Javon Hargrave is by far the best player at this position. Anybody that tells you otherwise is an idiot. He's one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, regardless of the position. He's a dominant player and deserves a lot of money. The only thing with him is he's about 30 years old, so that does take a little bit away from him, I guess, but he's still an awesome player, and I feel like he's only getting better. Like the last 3 years, he's just gotten better every year. Tomlinson, really solid interior player. I don't think he's a game-changing defensive lineman, but he's good, and he's still fairly young, and he's been good everywhere he's played. Played for the Giants, played for the Vikings. He's a good run stuffer. He's kind of like a lesser DJ Reader, in my opinion. David Onyemata, I love him as a player. He's just dealt with suspension, injuries. He's getting a little bit older, but he's a good pass rusher, a lot to handle in the interior, and an all-around good player. Fletcher Cox is, to me, just feels like a legend of the Eagles and won't really go anywhere else, but I could see him maybe going somewhere else at this point. He's still productive as a pass rusher, 7 sacks last year, but you need to limit his role at this point. He's not the player he used to be, but he's still really good. Zach Allen is the guy that I think is going to be the one where people are like, whoa, Zach Allen got that much money? Zach Allen is a good player. He's like more of a traditional 3-4 defensive end type of player, but he learned a lot under J.J. Watt. I thought was really underrated for the Cardinals. And if you want a guy that's got some pass rushing upside, that's your type of guy, Zach Allen. I like him. I would be really interested in him if I was in that type of system. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if the Broncos signed him now that they have Vance Joseph over there in Denver. Now, Larry Ogunjobi has been a good pass rusher his whole career, but I think is underrated as a run defender. Had a good season with the Steelers. Has been good with the Browns, has had like 10 sack seasons before with the Bengals, I believe. He's played a lot of different locations and places, but he's been good everywhere. Sheldon Rankins had a super underrated season last year. And I feel is just a well-rounded defensive lineman who can start or can be your third guy. And he's bounced back from some less than stellar seasons in his recent past. Draymond Jones is the guy that everybody was hyping up to get a ton of money this offseason, and I just don't see it. Like, he's a good pass rusher, but I don't think he's a well-rounded defensive lineman. I think you need to spell him, have him be in a rotation. I'm not willing to pay that type of guy a ton of money. Like, I don't know if any of you guys saw that report, but that definitely put me off about him specifically. But he's a good pass rusher, don't get me wrong. Just limited in run defense. Poona Ford is a good run defender for the Seahawks. Tessa's team, by the way, shout out to Tessa, who says, "Hey, Mitch, thanks for the Seahawks video I saw." Hey, thank you so much for watching. Appreciate it. And Poona Ford is a player that I think is underrated because he was just in a bad system fit for him last year. So Seattle changed their system up front. So they played more of a 3-4 style of front rather than a 4-3 attacking front. And that changed the type of player that Poona Ford is. So I think he needs to go back to a team that plays that style. Morgan Fox. Oh, you know a team that I think would be interested in Poona Ford is actually probably like the Niners. I think he would be a good replacement for somebody like, they never really replaced DJ Jones. I feel like that would be a decent replacement for DJ Jones. And then Morgan Fox is the final top tenner on there. Morgan Fox is just a solid pass rushing interior defensive lineman. Probably like the third guy in your rotation. You don't want him playing every snap, but on passing downs, he's good to come in there and give you a little bit of a boost from a pass rushing standpoint. So my undervalued and my buyer beware, I got Greg Gaines. I love these Rams interior defensive linemen, man. I got a crush on him. Greg Gaines, productive player there, good against the run, good pass rusher, super underrated. A'Shawn Robinson got hurt last year, but is a beast against the run, like absolute animal. And then Matt Ioannidis, I've always loved Matt Ioannidis. Like, anybody that's been watching this channel knows that. But Matt Ioannidis is an excellent pass rusher. Played for the Panthers last year. Has had like 6, 7, 8 sack seasons with the Washington Commanders in the past as well. Buyer beware, Akeem Hicks. I love the guy. I think he's an awesome run stuffer still, but he just gets hurt far too much. So I'm not willing to pay him like $10 million to play 1 year where he plays 8 games. You got to be very much aware of him. Like, don't bring him in as a starter. You have to have him in here as like a backup who can be a high upside guy for your defensive line. Ndamukong Suh, just because the guy is a merchant. Like, he's so good at finding the most money humanly possible for him to go to. And he's just not Ndamukong Suh anymore. Like, he's fine as like a rotation player, but he's not the Hall of Fame Ndamukong Suh that we once knew. And Draymond Jones, just because I saw the reports about him wanting all the money in the world, I just don't think he's worth it. So those are my defensive linemen, undervalued and buyer beware players. What's up to Jordan Hunter, who, by the way, I got your email, man. Thank you for sending that. I haven't listened yet, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Actually reminded me to listen to you. So then we've got the edge position, the big time pass rushers in free agency. Oh no, this is linebacker. My bad. What do we got? Do we have the edge position? Maybe I downloaded the wrong thing. Ah, that's why we're live. We're doing it live. Okay, I got to download this graphic for my top 10. But let me know if you have any questions about I spoiled the linebacker position. Oh no. Let me know if you guys have any questions about defense, your team, any specific needs, specific players, specific free agents that you have. Jordan sent me some cool guitar stuff. I'm going to have to listen to that. There we go. There it is. You know why? Because I spelt this guy's name wrong. You probably, if you can guess the name that I spelt wrong on the graphic, I had to remake the graphic. That's what happened, guys. Just behind the scenes. And then all of a sudden, I do this to my graphic. Look at this. This is just an absolute disaster right now here live on the Bottom Line View. Look at this. This is why I get paid the big bucks. Marcus Davenport is my number one. Marcus Davenport is an athletic stud. Never really lived up to his truest potential in New Orleans, but has had some really good seasons of, I think last year he had something like 10 sacks in 10 games or something like that. He's a good edge setter, good against the run, just a well-rounded player. He's not like a number one alpha pass rusher, but if he can remain healthy, man, this guy can still have a ceiling that he has yet to reach. Justin Houston, I just thought was an absolute beast last year. I don't understand why so many people are ranking him so low. I understand that he's like 400 years old, but he was unreal last year. Like, he was one of the best pass rushers in the NFL last year. Took over numerous games. Was a pain in the behind for the Bengals in the playoffs. Like, Justin Houston can still play. Brandon Graham is younger than Justin Houston, but I feel like has lost more of a step than Justin Houston has. Brandon Graham is good. He's a good power player. You can move him inside. He can rush from the interior. But he's not what he used to be. I mean, let's just be honest. He's not what he used to be. He's good, though. I think you want him more as your third, edge rotation player, though, because he's getting older. Jadeveon Clowney is just Jadeveon Clowney. I don't know how else to explain this. He's still a freak. He's still a beast. He's still strong as hell. He's still fast. He's still explosive, but he doesn't practice. He gets hurt. He's got a huge ego. Doesn't really care about football that much, but hey, he's still good. So he's a second edge rusher. If you need one, sign him up. Samson Ebukam, I think I'm going to be higher on him than most. I just like him. I feel like he's a good player that can fit any system. He could play edge rusher in a wide 9 49er system. He can play stand-up outside linebacker in the Rams 3-4 with Wade Phillips. He can drop back into coverage. He can rush the passer. He can stop the run really well. I think he's a really good run stopper. I just like him as a football player. Arden Key is one of my favorites ever since he was drafted. Kind of underwhelmed in his first couple of years with the Raiders. But after that, man, this guy's been awesome with the Niners, and he's been awesome with Jacksonville. I felt like at the end of the year with Jacksonville, he was their most productive and disruptive pass rusher, because what he does really well is he's got great length, and his ability to have that length, utilize that inside. He's a very good pass rusher from the interior, but he is a specific type of player. You don't want him playing every play, but he's like a Dietrich Wise type player. So he can set the edge a little bit in the run game, but he's more so like a weapon in passing situations. You put him on the inside, line him up against a guard, and just allow him to work. And he's really good in that standpoint right there. DeMarcus Walker had 7 sacks for the Titans last year. He's kind of like a fringe D-end, D-tackle type. He's like a Denico Autry type of player. He can pass rush better than expected, but he's also a very solid run defender. And I felt like he finally broke out last year with the Titans. So if you have a similar system to Tennessee, you would like DeMarcus Walker. Charles Omenihu is the guy that I think might be a little bit overvalued coming from the Niners. He's a good pass rusher, but I felt like he greatly benefited from the situation with the 49ers. He's good. I don't know how good he is. My boy Oscar Akarakananuku is number 9. That's not actually how you pronounce his name, but after all these years, I still don't know how to pronounce his name. He played for the Texans last year, and he was really good. He actually had the best season of his career. He had 5 sacks, and he's smaller. He kind of looks like Elvis Dumervil, if you guys remember him. He's short, but he's got really good pass rushing ability, good power, good quickness, and that is the name that I had to re-spell for this graphic. Lorenzo Carter is at number 10. I've always been a Lorenzo Carter fan. Lorenzo Carter is a guy that is like a hybrid linebacker edge player. He's like a Kyle Van Noy, can drop back into coverage, can play actual stand-up linebacker, can rush the passer, can blitz. If you're in a team, like a system that likes to blitz with good athletes, he's your guy. Then we've got edge rushers who are undervalued, buyer beware players. Arden Key, love him, just always have. Just think he's an awesome situational player. And these are the type of players you need in the NFL. These are the type of guys that you play a specific team and you need this guy to disrupt. Like, if you're playing the Chiefs or the Bills or the Bengals and you're playing a team that passes the ball a lot and you need an interior pass rusher, Arden Key. Anthony Nelson from the Bucks, I thought had a good season last year. He's gotten better with every year, but he's almost the opposite of Arden Key. Not a great pass rusher, but if you need a guy on early downs, just a big, massive man, he can set the edge really well. He's not super fast, but he's super strong. Dante Fowler, I felt like played really well for Dallas last year in a rotation role. I think a lot of people have sold on him. They've sold their stock. They've gotten rid of him. They've taken off the list, crossed him off. But I think in the right situation, he's still a really productive finesse edge pass rusher. And then we've got on the buyer beware, Yannick Ngakoue. Sacks, but doesn't do anything else really. He's a sack guy. His pass rushing is super inconsistent though, and his run defense is non-existent. I like he'll get sacks. That's great. Everything else, I'm not willing to pay for it. Jadeveon Clowney, not willing to pay for him not coming to my practice. I'm just not. I'm just not. Charles Omenihu, like I said, I think he was great with the Niners. I don't know if he'll be better than he was with the Niners anywhere else, though. So that's why he's buyer beware. Those are your edge pass rushers. Not the greatest crop, but a lot of veterans that can really contribute for a lot of teams in different roles. Moving to the linebacker position, the top 10. This is a great position, guys. If you want to sign somebody at a position this year in free agency, linebacker. I love these linebackers in this class. I mean, just look at this list right here. We've got Levante David. We've got Bobby Wagner. We've got David Long from the Titans, also a top 20 linebacker in the league. We got Bobby, who I always mispronounce his name. I think it's Okereke, but I used to call him Okereke for like 3 years. Then we've got Tremaine Edmonds, who still might be great one day. He's only like 24 because he was drafted at like 20. Drew Tranquil, who was awesome for the Chargers last year, especially in coverage. Denzel Perryman, who's a human missile. Jermaine Pratt, who's a really good number 2 linebacker for the Bengals. Leighton Vander Esch, who I thought played very well last year for the Cowboys, his best year in a while. And TJ Edwards for the Eagles, who was their best linebacker. So that's just the top 10. I mean, there's about 20 guys that I like in free agency at linebacker. Most of them are athletic. Most of them can play in space. Most of them can cover. Most of them are good against the run. Like, they're all good in some capacity. So I think this is an excellent top 10 linebacker free agency class. Let's get to the guys that I think are undervalued and buyer beware. So Drew Tranquil, I think, is undervalued because I think he's a really good coverage player and he's extremely smart. And I think he would make a lot more money. He's a lot like Matt Milano. I'm not just saying that because they're white, maybe a little bit, but they play similarly. Like, they're good in space. They can cover tight ends. They can cover in zone, and they move well sideline to sideline. And he's been hurt a lot, so that's why he's probably not valued as much as he should be. Caden Ellis for the Saints had a ton of sacks. He's a good pass rusher. He's a good blitzer. He's a different type of linebacker, but if you run that type of system, then you would really like Caden Ellis. Azeez Al-Shahir of the Niners was the 3rd linebacker behind Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw. And the only reason he's not more highly hyped is because he's the 3rd linebacker. That's the only reason, but he's a really good player. Every time Fred Warner or Dre Greenlaw get hurt, he comes in and he plays well. Buyer beware. Tremaine Edmonds, I like him a lot as an athlete, but he still has a lot of room to grow. He's inconsistent. He's just like, he's frustrating because he's so gifted, but he just doesn't always bring it 100%. Then we got Bobby Wagner, who I mean, the guy's a legend. He's one of the greatest linebackers of all time. He's in the top 10 probably. And he was great last year, but I just question his ability in coverage. I think his movement skills have declined. But if you want a guy that's going to be smart, is going to set your defense up to play well, to play hard, and you want a great run stopper and a guy that can blitz and a guy that can cover just a little bit still. You know what? I think Bobby Wagner's a better fit for like a team that plays, less zone and more man. Because I think his movement is not as good, but his strength and his recognition is still there. And Devin Bush, he's just mostly been a bust. He was really good his first year out of Michigan playing for the Steelers, and very fast, very quick, very gifted, but small and gets eaten up, and I think a little bit too aggressive at times, a little bit Devin White-ish as well, just not as good. That's what I see with these free agents. But yeah, this is my favorite top 10 class here, these linebackers right here. I love all these guys. David Long, I love. Perryman is a good player, but Levante David, I'm really intrigued to see where he goes. I think he's still elite. Moving to the secondary, the safety position. The top 10 safeties in free agency. Number 1 is Jesse Bates, without a shadow of a doubt. An elite player at safety. Great range. I love his range. He can fly. He's fast. He can go sideline to sideline, knock people over, can cover one-on-one receivers down the field, match routes expertly. He's very smart. He's a very good ball hawk in the middle of the field. If you need a center fielder, Jesse Bates is the number 1 guy. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, even when he was with the Saints, I was saying this guy is undervalued. He's underrated. He is a stud. Played for the Eagles this year. Different system for him. I honestly didn't. It's interesting because he led the league in interceptions, or he was up there at the very least. But he's a really good man player as well. And he didn't play a lot of man. Jordan says D-Max should be number 1. D-Max at number 10 because literally I wanted to put him on the list, but he has 1 year left. He might retire. And if he does play, he's playing for New England. So he's not going anywhere else. I wanted to put him on the list, but there's almost no value to him for 31 teams. So I couldn't put him any higher. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, again, just love his versatility, love his competitiveness, great trash talker, love everything about it. Von Bell is just no weaknesses. Good against the run, excellent tackler, good coverage player. Him and Jesse Bates have been one of the best duos in the NFL at safety. Nobody talks about them, though. Jordan Poyer is a great player still. A little bit older, though, 30, 31 years old. Good in the box, good covering tight ends. Was a top 5 safety last year. Got hurt a little bit this year, but still played through it. Still good, just getting older. Jimmy Ward, love Jimmy Ward. He's a hybrid player. He played mostly nickel this year for the Niners, but can play every position. Free safety, strong safety, nickel. So I think Jimmy Ward is awesome. I mean, if your team picked up Jimmy Ward, I'd be ecstatic. John Johnson, he's the one I'm not so sure about. He hasn't played that well in Cleveland, but he was great with Los Angeles. I feel like if he finds the right system fit, he'll be a good player again. He's more of a box safety, though, and you got to put him there because he's not super fast. Adrian Amos, I used to love, hasn't had his best year as of late. Didn't play that well with Green Bay. Got beat a lot down the field. Maybe regressing. He's around 29. Played really well for Chicago, really steady for Green Bay, but had his worst year of his career probably last year. But still, that consistency through the years other than this year puts him on my top 10. After that, Juan Thornhill and Julian Love are pretty similar because they're both younger. They're both guys that I think might be paid more than you would expect because they're around that age of 26, 27, where teams might be willing to invest in them. They're both young enough where they could still get better, but I don't think either of them are great players, but they're good. Thornhill just does his job really well. I think he's a good deep safety, does his job really well, doesn't miss a lot of tackles last year. Julian Love is more of like a hybrid player. He's a little bit small, but he can kind of be a little bit of a nickel corner, a little bit of a free safety, good cover guy, maybe not a great tackler. So that's how I see those. And then I had D-Mac, who's legend, Hall of Famer, in my opinion, one of the greatest safeties of all time. I know I said it. I don't care. Just a legend, like one of the greatest leaders at this position. I mean, I can't say anything more about Devin McCourty that I haven't said, but he's not going anywhere other than New England. So Johnny is in the chat. He says, sorry, just dropping in. Thoughts on Devin Singletary? Devin Singletary, I think he's more of a number 2 running back, honestly. I'm not a huge fan of Devin Singletary. And honestly, I think to the point where I've probably underrated him for too long. But I think he's deceptively good at breaking tackles. I think he's been better at catching the ball out of the backfield recently. He's grown in that area. He's not great. They could improve. The Bills could improve in that area for sure. He's a fine running back. I don't think he's anything special. If I'm Buffalo, I probably let him walk. If I'm another team, I'll bring him in for a 1 to 2 year deal as a number 2 running back because he can do a little bit of everything fairly well, but he's nothing special. I hope that helps you. But I think his biggest attribute, he's not a breakaway runner, but he's good at creating yards, like through after contact. I think that's his best skill. Cornerback. Top 10 cornerbacks, which is the final position. Jamel Dean is my number 1 corner. This isn't an overly strong cornerback group, by the way. There's a lot of older players that used to be awesome that are no longer awesome, but they're still good. Jamel Dean is the one where you look at him and you say he's young. He's played really consistently well for the Bucs. He's played man, so you have that on tape. He's played zone, you have that on tape. He's played in big games, you have that on tape. What else? Like he's huge. He's 6'3". He's physical. He's fast as F. He's like a 4.3 speed type of guy. So it's just a rare specimen. I mean, you don't find 6'3", 4.3 corners every day. So Jamel Dean can grow a lot. I could see him going somewhere where he becomes a truly elite player if he gets the right coaching. But there's always been something missing with him a little bit in Tampa. I think his biggest flaw is his ball skills. His ball skills aren't great. He can work on those, but he's athletically very promising. Jonathan Jones is my number 2. I think he's a better nickel than he is a perimeter corner, but I think what he did for himself last year has proved that he can play on the outside and play well. I think if you want him to be a perimeter corner, he's more of a number 2 than a number 1. He struggles against elite receivers, but he was very good against good receivers. And he's a very good nickel corner. Like he's especially if you're a man coverage system, Jonathan Jones is your guy at nickel corner. Marcus Peters, I think Marcus Peters is going to be undervalued on the open market because I think he's proven to play in any system. He's played heavy man coverage under Wink Martindale. He played a lot of zone as a young player in Kansas City. He played a lot of zone last year for Baltimore. And he's got great ball skills. He's got a ton of swagger, competitiveness. I like Marcus Peters still. He's still a good player. Bryce Callahan is an elite nickel when he plays. Problem is his injury issues have come and gone throughout his career, but Bryce Callahan was mostly healthy last year, and I thought he was elite when he played for the Chargers. He's mostly a nickel guy, though. He doesn't really play on the outside. James Bradbury, I think, is overrated. I think he's a solid to good number 2. I don't think he's a great number 2 because he struggles to play man at this point in his career. He's mostly a zone corner. As we saw in the Super Bowl, he struggled whenever he was in man. So that's something I don't love in my corners. But he's smart. He's a veteran. He played really well last year, statistically speaking, and fit into a zone scheme very, very well. Cam Sutton of the Steelers, same thing, similar. He's younger than James Bradbury, but he's a zone-heavy corner fit. He's smart. He can tackle. He's got a little bit of an edge to him. Byron Murphy is one of my favorites. I probably should have ranked him a little bit higher. I like Byron Murphy. Really smart player. Good tackler. Good nickel player. Can play on the outside as well. Did last year, but played nickel before that for Arizona. Still young. I could see him getting a bigger contract than many people expect. But he can do everything. Tackle, blitz, cover. Rock Ya-Sin is a good man coverage perimeter corner. Did not stay healthy enough with the Raiders, but I thought played well when he was in there. He was their best corner. Emmanuel Mosley, I think, is underrated. Played well for the Niners. Does a lot of different things. He's a longer corner. He's got pretty good speed. Good in zone. Good in man. Patrick Peterson had an amazing year for his age last year. Was unreal. Like last year, I just wonder if he can back that up another season. Like I don't know if he's going to be able to continue that success that he had last year in terms of interceptions and game-breaking plays, because before that, he wasn't so good. And the Vikings' pass defense was terrible. So I think Patrick Peterson, you want him more as a number 2, probably. As a number 1, it was pushing it for the Vikings, but he exceeded all expectations last year. My undervalued and buyer beware, Thomas from the Texans has just consistently graded out very well from PFF and played really well. I think he can play in the inside or the outside, play mostly zone coverage. Byron Murphy, like I said, just love this player. I don't think he has many flaws. He's not like an elite player, but he's a really smart one. He reminds me a lot of Logan Ryan, honestly. Emmanuel Mosley is another guy that I think didn't play last year, basically, and he was really good the year before. He was like the Niners' number 1 corner coming into the year. And then they signed Charvarius Ward, and then he got hurt early in the year. They missed him, but he can play, I think, in that system really at a high level. Buyer beware, James Bradbury, Patrick Peterson, Eli Apple. Eli Apple, you got to worry about the ego and the inconsistency. Patrick Peterson, the age and the name. And James Bradbury, coming off a great year where he mostly just played zone, which worries me when you have a corner that, because I think people will look at him and say, well, he used to play a lot of man. And I would say, well, this year, if you look at his tape, he wasn't that good when he played man. So you got to be very specific about the fit with him. So that's what worries me. But those are your top 10 free agents at every position. I know it was very in-depth, very long, but I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it got you prepared and ready for free agency so that you understand all these top free agents and know something about them going into free agency, so that if your team signs one of these players, you said, oh, Mitch said this about him. So you can always come back to this video as well as a resource for, my thoughts on all these players as well. And of course, I'll be breaking down where all of these players go throughout free agency live here on the channel. This is always fun for me to go through as an exercise to break down these players, think about these players, and think about fits for certain systems. A lot more free agency content coming, guys. Predictions about numerous players and where they're going to land, team fits, all that sort of fun stuff. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you soon. Hopefully, we can have a great offseason. I'm looking forward to free agency. So thank you guys. Tessa, Caesar, Jordan, Big Al, Johnny, everybody that was in the chat. Shout out to you guys. We will see you soon. It's Mitch. Peace.